All right, I'm using this Wolf's Carbon pencil for this, and it's important to have it sharpened quite nicely so we can draw sharper and softer lines. And I'm going to start with softer lines, trying to block in uh, the general shapes of the head. I'm simplifying this whole side with a line, and you can see this line is not very harsh, so it will be very easy to adjust it. And maybe I can think about using gestural triangulation to give me a larger shapes right away with one curve. And think about the other side where it is. Again, I can move and change these lines if I need to, but I get that general shape of the head, the neck, and I can even think about the shirt a little bit coming around, and the shoulders. It gives me already 1, 2, 3 overlapping shapes. It kind of sets up a design for the picture. I'm going to make it a little smaller so I can easily move these lines. So let's see. Make it this much smaller. And because these lines are very soft, they're much easier to erase also. If I have my eraser. So even though this carbon pencil is not like a graphite pencil, it doesn't erase quite as easily. With this way of applying it on the paper, it doesn't really dig into the paper, so it's easy to get it off the paper. So I got this shape. Then I can think about the major sides of the face. I'm thinking of where this side of the face would be, and I think it's somewhere here. Here's the side of the face. Here's my thirds of the face, the eyebrows, the hairline, those receding hairline here. And here I can correct my line for the forehead a little bit, adding a little bit more slope. And I'm starting to get a little bit more concrete line for that as I'm adjusting things. So here, these lines are clearer than the line that I did before. And here I have a very soft edge for the side of the eye socket, very soft edge for this cheekbone, but it all sets up the front of the face. As I set up maybe this side of the mouth barrel with the mustache there, I can think about where would it be this edge on this side. So I can mark that. That's also front of the face. I can think about this side of the chin versus this side, working on both sides together, really setting up the angle of the face. I can look at where the center of the forehead between all of these symmetrical landmarks, and I can mark that in there for myself. And I can see that the bridge of the nose is coming in. And then I can mark the base of the nose, maybe a little bit higher even, because maybe the lower part with the beard is a little longer than the eyebrows. Yes, it is. So I got to make that a little bit longer. Yes, it is. And I think about where the tip of the nose is. So I'm thinking of this plane, very thin plane of the front of the nose, moving off to the side over here. And then it's going to move back. That base of the nose is the plane that moves back. So it starts to move in and out. I'm thinking of the center line. It's very important to consider how narrow is this foreshortened eye socket is. So we can look at it as an abstract shape. How narrow is this shape? Maybe it's close, but maybe I still don't show enough. It's pretty close. It's not bad. And then I can think about where the corners of the mouth are. Again, I can think about diagonal relationships. Under the tip of the nose, somewhere here is one corner, and diagonally here is the other corner. I could consider the angles of everything. So I have the same type of um, level, perspectival level for all the parts. Here's the lower lip. Here is the corners of the upper lip. And it sets up major landmarks for me. I can think about the level of the ear in relationship to this. It's a little higher than the eye level, and it's a little bit lower than the nose. And it's narrow at the bottom, but sticks out past the edge. If I got the edge right, past the edge of the head. So I got the placement for the ear. Now I want to look at this pretty soft lighting, but still clearly see where the light meets the shadow. And I want to find all of the coarse shadows as they divide that shape into light and the shadow. I want to mark them down. So those are major inner corners still. Some of them I already established, but we can get a little bit more specific and take it all the way through the whole form. So let's start from the top so we can do it more consistently throughout. And I would say that it's very soft over here. A lot of the light kind of hides where exactly that line is. This is a window light from the left side. So it's a very soft lighting. And then it goes around the spherical shape. And if we remember, the coarse shadows can be very soft on very round forms. So I'm gonna mark it like this. It changes direction a little bit this way. Then it goes the up, up this way. This is halftone, so it's still affected by the light. And then it transitions down. And it's hard to tell whether this part of the bone is in the light or in the shadow, because all of them look very similar in there. So I would say that, yes, maybe it is in the light right here. And then I see a little bit of the shadow like this. Just to get even more specific, it comes across to that area of the eye. And then we're going to have a form of the eye. So I can think about the spherical shape. And if I generalize it, half of it is going to be facing away from the window in the shadow. There's going to be a little bit of the light on the upper eyelid. And then there's going to be, again, a shadow underneath the lower eyelid, and the cast shadow coming across. The cheekbone catches a little bit of the light. I see the core shadow. We're traveling down around the forms in here. This, I have darker colors around my, below the eye bag, something, I don't know, sunburn or sunspots of some sort. I don't want to draw that as a dark spot because we're drawing shadows, not dark versus light. So yes, that's a different local color of the skin. Ignore that. Let's just focus on the light. We're going this way. We're going this way. We have to kind of think about the direction of the light and the planes where they're looking towards the light or away. So it gets very complicated at times. And I think in here, all of this is in the shadow. The shadow starts at this corner of the mustache. There might be a little bit of shadow in here too. And the hair kind of creates their own shadows and lets some of the light come through. So it's, everything is complicated. And let me jump over with the eyebrow to the nose. So we have a coarse shadow coming through, and it starts getting a lot sharper than these soft angles over here. Notice on a very round forehead, I'm making it pretty soft. Cheekbone is a little bit sharper. It gets a little bit sharper. As it gets to these beveled edges of the nose, they get even sharper. And here it's going to transition to very sharp corner for these cartilages around the nose. and you know, there's very soft kind of a plane transition up in here, so some shadows come through like so. All of that side is in the shadow, so all of that is in the shadow. From the nose, there's a cast shadow drops onto here, and this is pretty soft light that's hard um, to divide. You know, if you have a spotlight, it would be a lot easier. But sometimes we don't have an easy subject matter, but it can have a nice, beautiful qualities to it too. So in here, we have a cast shadow dropping down, and it's going to be pretty soft, actually. Usually cast shadows next to the object are not that soft, but in this case, because the light source is so wide, the whole window, it is pretty soft. And it transitions all the way across like this because the tip of the nose casts a longer shadow, and it joins with the shadow of the side of the face. This is not light, that's shadow. I don't feel the same effects as the effects of the light here. I do feel it a little bit on the cheekbone and in this area. Even though it's darker, it is affected by the light. I think the corner of the lip catches a little bit of the light. Notice that I'm drawing a lot of things with the side of the pencil. That's why we want that kind of a curve edge of the pencil. If we need it sharper, we just tip the tip towards the paper. If we want it softer, we make it a little bit more parallel to the paper. So here we have lips coming through. There's ambient occlusion in between the lips. It's gonna be a little bit of a shadow here. Let's speed this up a little bit. I think all of this is the shadow underneath, or maybe it's over here. So sometimes it's hard to tell, but we have to make that decision at some point. So is this shadow, is that light? Is this shadow, is that light? So we need to decide. I think I'll make it like this. This is the shadow. I'm gonna take this line out of there because there's no line. So I'm just focusing on these core shadows in here. And I think the beard is partially in the shadow over here. And then we start getting a soft core shadow on the throat, along with the throat over here. Coming like this. A little bit of a shadow on the end of the muscle over here. There's a little bit of the light right here. And there might be a shadow on the shirt. On the eyeball, you can see how dark that white of the eyeball is. The whites of the eyeball are not very light. So if they're in shadow, which there often are because of the eyelashes and the eyelid shading things, half of it is going to be in the shadow. So we're going to just mark that. There's going to be shadow on the upper eyelid, and a little bit of the shadow on the lower eyelid. So notice how I get very specific, not trying to generalize it just by creating a general shape. So now I can go into detailing it. I could have made more detailed drawing, but this is the initial step. And if I block in now the tone of the shadow for this whole area, it will give me a closer experience to how we see forms in real life based on the lighting. So I'm going to just fill this in from top to bottom with a one direction of hatching. Now you can use side of this and that will make it very soft, or you can use more of a tip of the pencil and it will give you lines, but in the shadow, you want things to be fairly soft. So I don't want to have very abrupt tips to my marks. I want them to blend in, and even if you can't draw a line across the whole length of this, and you have to do it in several goes, you can blend them together. But it's important not to fill it in one little section at a time, but join all of these parts, like the ear, the hair. We don't want to fill it in one little part at a time. We're trying to flatten the whole area of shadow and show the connection of that effect of the shadow over the whole area. With the cast shadow on the short, for example. And if you go over some of the edges and you don't like how it looks, you can easily go and clean it up and get the nice clean edges back in there. You can also use some kind of a smudging tool, including a finger, and join this a little bit. That will give less of this flickering of the paper. It will push the drawing material into the low spots of the texture of the paper, and it will look a little bit more like a shadow. You can use a paper stump, for example, and that allows you to get even into a smaller sections like this. And at some point, it starts to become like a drawing tool where you can actually draw a little bit with it, and like soften some edges. I wouldn't recommend to overdo this, where you just blending everywhere, because blending edges can also look very ethereal, not very tactile, and it can break the illusion of that nice tactile surface on there. So a little bit is okay. All over. You can see how when I do this, it's very different quality from when I don't blend. It looks very different. So we want to have uniform look, and I would suggest you only keep that in the shadow. You don't blend too much in the lights. All right. And then we talked about adding the contrasting value in here, another reference for how dark we can get with this material. So for example, I can get ambient occlusions of the nostril, just to see another limit to this values. And here in the eye, eyelashes, how dark things get in the hair, for example. And that will serve as a reference to which we can compare our other values that as we put them in here. So it's already gives a nice wide range in there, you know, that pupil really makes it look like it's staring now. It gives life to it. And now we got to bring all the other values in between to the right relationship, but at least we clearly see the difference between light and shadow. Strongly recommend you resolve all of your core shadows and cast shadows first, and then move on to the areas of the light. So here is a very wide core shadow. I can make it a little bit wider. Notice how this is dark, and then in here we're getting a little bit of the cool reflected light back. So I want to make sure that this whole plane of the face looks darker. And then I have a plane of the face that looks lighter. And that will make it look like an egg, the head like an egg, that it feels like it has a planier differences. It's a little bit more organized that way. underneath the jaw or underneath the head in the back, there is a little bit of a different plane like this. So it's not reflecting or catching the reflected light quite the same. And you know, I don't worry about the beard so much. We can add those small details. And here it's significant detail, so we can add that. But my scuffle on the side here is not as important as the larger value relationship. So we don't want to get into it so soon. Now the value of the hair is a different local color. So we do want to treat different local colors, like the value of the shirt, differently from the skin. So it's not the same, so we want to show that off. Here's the shirt. And let's give it a tone. That right away separates it. You get a general tone here, but in the light, we probably want to start sculpting things with a little bit more contrast. We'll treat the light different from how we treat the shadow. Maybe using contour hatching, for example. So I'm going to go back in here, get a little bit more separation for the hair. The hair contours my skull a little bit. So I want to show how sharp it is here. And maybe it gets softer, but I'm not drawing individual hairs. I'm just thinking of groups and shapes that of different values that I see in there. Like there is a little bit of the sculpt seen through the hair there. It's, you know, it's an interesting transparent quality of the hair that would be nice to show. A little bit more of a lost edge over here. You know, I have a balding head, but I have to embrace it in here and just draw the beauty of it. Here we have a little bit density around, and then it gets a little bit lighter. And even though the hair is going away from the head, I'm drawing it with the contour shape, and that's okay. You know, we can draw a few hairs in there going the opposite direction, and that will be enough to show that difference. Right? And here, let's find other coarse shadows. So for the smaller areas, I grab now pencil in a writing way, and that allows me to get into small hatching marks, a little bit more control, still putting the nail on the paper to control the pressure. And I can little by little hatch this, find the forms in there, like as I find these inner corners of the nostril. In the back of the nostril, there is a crevice, so that's the inner corners. There's less reflected light in there, so I can start darkening these areas also. These are ambient occlusion, less reflected light in there, so we can start darkening this. Eyebrow has a darker value. But I don't want to draw it, you know, it's very thin over here, and it's just a darker plane like this. Now the crease of my eyelid gets a little bit darker, and then there is eyelashes that have some thickness and very dark values. I put that in. There is a darker local color for the corner of the eye and some ambient occlusion also. I'm throwing all these names at you just so we can start using these concepts, right? And then it's easier to say, why is it dark in here? Well, there's no planes that are facing towards these outside walls that are reflecting lights into it. So it's ambient occlusion in there. It's like a little concave area. And then after we're done, and I wouldn't say that we're done yet, you know, there's plenty of shadows to look for. Maybe the bottom plane of the mustache, the right side of the mustache here. We can move on into the light areas. And we want to still maintain the difference of the light versus the shadow. We don't want to lose that difference. But we don't want to confuse it. That's why we filled all of the dark first. So whenever we do anything in the light, we're doing it in relationship to the shadow. So we're definitely going to get pretty light areas in here, but then as it gets closer in here, we're going to get values a little bit darker, and that's where the gradation of contour hatching can become very helpful. You can add a little bit of it in the shadow, but notice because the shadow was flattened, in contrast, we're going to end up having a little bit more form in the areas of the light, but a lot less of that in the shadows. So the shadows will remain looking flatter. Here we have a protrusion of the bones. I want to show how it's lighter planes on the left, but away from the light source, things getting a little bit more halftone, darker values. Overall, I got to feel this big mass of the forehead. And there's changes of planes in there, so I want to respect that. Notice that this side of the head is a lot lighter than this side, so there will be values in all of these areas. But we're feeling like there is still light in here versus that little bit of a flattening in the shadow. So if I don't feel enough, then I add a little bit more tone into the shadows. I think you can definitely get a lot more tone in all of these areas. This cheekbone is a lot lighter than this cheekbone, so we can add some form into here. Let me erase my first gestural triangulation in there, just to get that a little bit lighter. Add a little bit of contour hatching. I have to press very lightly here to do that. The nose is darker for sure, so I can get that darker. And then as it gets to this cheekbone, it gets even darker. We just need to use contour hatching to start describing these rounder forms. And now that cheekbone, that's pretty darker because of the, again, different skin tone in there. So where a sharper point would give me nicer lines in here. Get a little deeper crevice, ambient occlusion. I can start describing the, you know, even the eyeball is pretty gray. There's some highlights in there, but let's describe that slightly darker value in there. And that allows for us to feel where the highlights would be. A core shadow on the eyelid. And it's pretty dark in here. So we start to develop it. Now that we saw the general relationships, we can start getting into a little bit more specifics. I think I need to develop that local color of my hair on the facial hair. And it's pretty dark under the nostril too. Again, not following the direction of the hair, drawing the hair individually, but rather as a mass. And then the shadow, we don't necessarily want to suggest details, but rather the absence of information in the shadow. In the shadow, we see less. A bit more value contrasts in this masses underneath the mouth barrel. There's more light coming from the top. Usually that's the case. So on the bottom, things get a little bit darker. Underneath the head with these cast shadows, things are getting darker. Usually you even have a little bit of more reflected light on the bottom of the jaw there. And this beard can really get fairly dark. And that, we can push it quite dark, but remember that photography is usually loses some of the information. When we look at things in real life, things will not look quite so dark. Our eyes will be able to see so much information in there. So we're not trying to make things look photographic. We're trying to make things look like a form. That's a flattening effect that the photograph creates. Even though photograph depicts so much detail, so we do understand the form. We can actually do things better than some things better than photograph, and that's why we're trying to understand what makes three-dimensional volumes, makes the drawing look more three-dimensional. And I can spend quite a bit of time developing all this, and I probably will do that later by myself. But it's getting there. It's getting pretty close. And when you're working on your own work, you can kind of work at your own pace and figure out how much time you would spend on things. You can slow down, step back to make sure that you get the accuracy. And so the beauty of self-portraits is that you can always use yourself reliably, come back to your portrait and just work on the problems of unique light, unique shapes that the face provides to you, and explore and learn how to draw. You learn how to draw not yourself, but draw anything by using your abilities to measure, look at the contrasts, relationships between different parts. So I just add a little bit of conclusion on this side. I don't want the ear to be too sharp so it doesn't come forward too much. It is in the shadow. It's important not to make it too light. Sometimes people see that the ear is a little lighter than the face and they try to make it or leave it light, like they leave eyeballs light. I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that I don't do that. That I'm going to find a flat qualities inside of this ear. I don't want the outlines to stand out. I just want to show that there's different tones. It's not that black. It's not that dark. I don't need a dark outline for this. We'll do something like this. And, you know, this is not the end. It can be developed with more finesse later on, but simplifying the process where you separate light and the shadow first, you develop all of the aspects of shadow, like the core shadow, the ambient occlusions. So it acts as a reference for you, and then move on to the other areas separately. It allows you to compare all of your core shadows to each other, compare all of your halftones to each other, and keep the light and shadow separate, and not just chase after each individual different values without organizing it and making sure that things are kind of not mixing together. Let me just add a couple of areas in here. All right. Do you guys have any questions?